much. Welcome. Good morning, afternoon, evening from wherever you're dialing in from. We're really delighted to have you with us here today. I'm Rebecca Brooks. I'm Food Systems Lead at the Climate Champions team, and the Climate Champions supports the 2 UN climate change high-level champions of the current and incoming COP presidencies, so the UAE and Azerbaijan. And we support them in their mandate to amplify and mobilize non-state actors around the global climate agenda. And in this capacity, we help to facilitate and launch the Food Systems Call to Action at COP28, based on a consultative process with many partners on the call and others, and supported by our partner, the Just Raw Transition. So thanks for joining this webinar today on the Food Systems Call to Action, preparing for action ahead of the 3 Rio Conventions summits. We're going to have a discussion about what we can expect from the fast approaching 3 Rio Conventions, and we'll hear insights from our excellent set of panelists. We're delighted that they could join us today. They'll outline the roles of different actors across food systems that they can play to drive food systems transformation. And we'll also discuss a set of high-level food systems asks and messages as an offering to the community to use, adapt and tailor going into the 3 Rio Conventions. And these build on the food systems call to action, this multi-stakeholder effort, and the shared vision and priority actions and principles that the call to action sets out. But first, we'll hear from Gonzalo Munoz to frame our discussion today and to give an overview of the food systems call to action and why the 3 Rio Conventions are so important. So over to you, Gonzalo.
Thanks so much, Rebecca, and welcome everyone to this call. My name is Gonzalo Munoz, first and foremost a farmer from Chile. So food and farming are very close to my heart and concretely in my agenda. I was the previous UN high-level climate action champion for COP25, and I continue to work very closely with the high-level champions for COP28 and COP29, Her Excellencies Razan Al-Mubarak, Nigar Al-Padarai. I'm also a co-founder of a new global southern-based NGO called Ambition Loop. It's based here in Chile, but working globally. So I'm very excited to have set up at the start of this year with brilliant people, some of them in this call today. So why food systems? We know very well that food systems are remarkable, providing food for a growing population and also giving livelihoods for over 4 billion people. Yet we know that our food systems are facing unprecedented and accelerating challenges and are also, let's say, responsible for significant environmental, social, and economic costs. So during COP28 last year, we had a landmark moment for food and agriculture. We achieved a huge amount thanks to the efforts of many people in this room and many other that are not necessarily here today with us. In that precise moment, we all, as a global community, launched the COP28 UAE Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems, and Climate Action that is now already endorsed by 160 heads of states and governments. So that was a massive achievement. And under the leadership of Razan Al-Mubarak, the high-level champion for COP28, we also launched the Non-State Actors Food System Call to Action. This is a shared vision and a set of priority actions taking a food systems approach across production, consumption, protecting and restoring nature, and also food loss and waste. It's calling on all actors to take urgent action now in order to transform food systems to deliver better outcomes for people, for nature, and for climate. The call to action calls for the ambitious implementation of the COP28 UAE Declaration. So asking and pushing and supporting the role of governments, noting, of course, their vital role. The governments play this fundamental role in creating the enabling conditions for then other actors to go further and go faster. It always centers on the need to support farmers and other frontline food systems actors, including women and youth. That's the logic of the call to action. So hundreds of food system actors from farmers, businesses, civil society, consumer organizations, philanthropies, and many others have already endorsed the call to action, with more and more endorsing every day. And as of today, this leadership group includes 300 endorsers representing 1.2 billion farmers through farmer organizations, 2.2 billion residents represented by some national governments, businesses along the agri-food value chain with around $1 trillion in revenues, and 150 civil society and philanthropic organizations, with 1/3 of them headquartered in emerging and developing countries, operating then in all regions of the world. That's a huge achievement that we must use for maintaining the momentum we have already achieved at COP28, and then keep food systems at the center of the global climate action agenda. As more endorsers we have, more prominent we will be in the agenda for the long run, but then with a concrete focus on what will happen in the next, let's say, 12 to 16 months. This year is the year of the 3 Rio Conventions. The Nature COP in Cali, starting in a few days. Next week, some of us will gather in Cali. Then the Climate COP in Baku from November 11th to 22nd. I'll join also many of you there. And then the third of the Rio Conventions, that is the less known, is the desertification COP, that this year will be hosted by Saudi Arabia in Riyadh. And remember this, probably one of the most important for food and agriculture, due to all of the logics in the desertification COP to be totally related to food and agriculture. So we have a huge opportunity to thread food system messaging through the conventions, focusing on the nexus of food, nature, land, climate, and people. At CBD COP16, we can highlight the links between nature and food systems, as food production deeply relies on nature, and we cannot achieve the Paris Agreement goals without action on food and nature. There will be a long and strong agenda on putting those two topics connected. At COP29, we can highlight the crucial role of finance in funding and incentivizing the food systems transition. And later at CCD COP16, we can strengthen the connections between healthy land, soils, drought resilient, water, and food production. So this is critical to set the stage for what will come next year for COP30 in Belém. I was last week in Belém working with the national government and the government of Pará, and it's absolutely evident the importance that food systems can have in the agenda for COP30. So this year, to deliver the food system call to action, we have to, of course, continue to expand the endorsers network, maintain a balance of endorsers across stakeholder groups. We need to have more and more endorsers in that concrete number. Then identify a set of 20 case studies that we have worked on to bring the priority actions areas to live and demonstrate there is action happening across the world. We have already, and it will be shown. And then we have developed a set of key asks and messages building on the food system call to action text and based on several consultations with many of you as an offering to continue our multi-stakeholder advocacy. So those are 3 main roles at this moment. So I encourage all of you to join this group of food system leaders and endorse the call to action if you haven't done so, in order for us to continue to raise the urgent need for action on food system to deliver for people, nature, and climate. So with that, I will hand over back to Rebecca and hope that we can have a very fruitful conversation about this. Back to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Gonzalo. So I'm just, before we get into our panel discussion, I'm just going to go through some of the key asks and messages that Gonzalo mentions that we've been developing over the past several months with many of you on the call and many others. And these are really intended to be an offering as part of this multi-stakeholder initiative around the food systems call to action to continue to raise momentum on food systems. Now, we know that food systems are incredibly complex and nuanced and very context specific, and these asks and messages are no way attempting to sort of be a narrative we expect everyone to use, but they're an offering to use, adapt, tailor for your messages and advocacy as you see helpful, really building on the assumption that several of us have discussed, that as a community will probably be more effective if we align around a few simple clear asks, and these build on the shared vision and asks of the food systems call to action, which was developed through a consultative process in the latter half of last year, and based on multiple consultations, meetings, webinars, workshops, and dialogues with members of the current endorser network and other partners, and also with the guidance and steer of our advisory committee, made up of organisations representing food systems actors and stakeholders, and also with comms partners who've been very helpful in encouraging us to keep these as clear and as short as we can. So if we move to there's two slides going through the very high level messaging that we've put together. So the first one is around action on food. We know that we ultimately need action. We know that our food systems are remarkable at providing livelihoods, but they also face increasing challenges and are responsible for social, environmental, and economic costs, as Gonzalo mentioned at the start. And we're calling for urgent action, including by 2030, to make significant measurable progress towards transitioning food production to sustainable, regenerative, agroecological approaches, to improve food environments, to provide healthy, sustainable, and locally appropriate diets that are available, accessible, and affordable to all, to conserve 30% of land, water, and ocean, and restore 30% of all degraded ecosystems, aligning with the Global Biodiversity Framework goals, and to halve food loss and waste, aligning with the SDG 12.3 goal. And also a key message is to call on governments to implement the COP28 UAE declaration signed by now 160 heads of state, and strengthen the links across the 3 Rio Conventions. Then the second set of key messages are on this slide around scale, strengthen, and support. So these build on the asks in the food systems call to action. They outline that we must take urgent, inclusive, and collaborative action on food to transform food systems to deliver people, nature, and climate. The first is around scaling finance. We know we need to scale up and reorientate all sources of finance to incentivize and fund resilient, sustainable, equitable food systems. We need to strengthen global targets, action plans, and accountability frameworks, and we must support farmers, food producers, and Indigenous peoples, actively supporting them and meaningfully including them in policy-making and decision-making processes. So we really see this as a collaborative opportunity to unite on a shared set of asks and messages that as helpful to be adapted and tailored, and also recognizing that food systems are incredibly complex, locally specific, and will require locally appropriate national action. So how will we use these? We've got several channels that we're hoping to use. The first thing is also to say that we would love feedback on these throughout this call, or feel free to email us, and we can I'll actually discuss offline, but we are planning to circulate them through the call to action endorser network, and with aligned partners as an offer to use in comms ahead of and during the 3 Rio Conventions. We're working with comms partners to amplify these and other messaging initiatives, briefing with journalists, and also through our and partners' social media posts and communication plans. So very keen to get your feedback on these throughout the discussion, and I'll now hand back to Gonzalo to introduce the panel. Back to you, Gonzalo.
There we are. Thanks so much, Rebecca. So I'm really delighted to introduce our panelists. I don't know if Betty was able to connect. I know that she was having some trouble with connection. Rebecca, do you have any idea? But well, I'll start with Martina Fleckenstein, Global Policy Director for Food at the World Wildlife Fund International. Dear Diane Holdorf, Executive Vice President and a member of the Senior Management Team at World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And Luca Torre, Co-Founder and Co-CEO of GAWA Capital. I don't know if Betty Chinyamunyamu CEO of National Smallholder Farmers Association of Malawi, could finally connect.
Betty's just struggling to join, so let's come to her.
So I'll move on. Okay. So I will start with you then, Martina. Thank you for joining. What can we expect from this the Rio Trio, right? The 3 Rio Conventions. Why is it so important to strengthen connection across them and between the diverse food system actors?
Yeah, thank you, Gonzalo, and thank you, Rebecca, for the invitation. I think the momentum is more than ever now. If you look back in the last, I was really reflecting on what we have achieved in the last years. And I look back to Glasgow, where food was only something people start to talk about. And since Sharm el-Sheikh, we really managed to get food in the presidency program, not only in the climate, but I think it's a huge success also to see that there will be an Agri-Food Day at the UNCCD conference in Riyadh. And we have at least a small food day under the FAO responsibility in Cali. And in this context, and look at the Rio Convention, it's really interesting because they have all a shared origin. They are all organized, or they are created 1992 to 1994. But what has happened is that these conventions have mostly operated in silos and made limited progress in addressing really interconnected issues. And I think with the food and food system, it could be really the umbrella which brings together all the 3 conventions. I think, Gonzalo, you mentioned this in the non-state actor call to action and also in the UAE declaration. This is already a door opener because it connects already the conventions. And what we have to do now is really to building the bridge between the 3 conventions, also to integrate the UNCCD one. And looking back, what has happened, and I think we really made progress this year at UNIA 6. Finally, the resolution was adopted to strengthen the cooperation across multilateral environmental agreements, which also, by the way, includes the SDGs. Then we have this so-called Rio Trio initiative, whatever it will be at the end. But it's great that the 3 presidencies are coming together and encourage the partnership across governments, institutions, and civil society. And I think it's important also looking forward to keep an eye what's coming out of this. And also, I think, which is encouraging, Colombia pushes for they called it unified plans on climate and nature pledges, which would be also interesting to see. And there is also the idea of launch something before COP. So what I want to say, there is this momentum. And this momentum has to be kept by us, but it also has to be carried forward by the governments. And in this context, it's more than urgent really to think about how to align the mandatory commitments, the one in the nationally determined contributions, and the one we have in the NB-SAPs, the biodiversity strategy and action plans. And finally, to look how to bring this together with the land degradation neutrality targets, which is more focused on land, on soil, on restoration. But it's a very important bridge between the 3 conventions. And just to make one example, if you look on starting with Cali, there is a number of the global biodiversity framework targets which are closely connected to climate. So it's especially target 1, which is on land use and spatial planning. It's target 2, which is on restoration. Then we have to look at target 3, which is on protection, which also could help to minimize and to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And then we have the very important one from our food system, it's target 10, and also the one on finance, target 18. And if you look on the climate, it's a lot on linkages, what you also have already presented, which is in the ask we have submitted on climate. And finally, if you look at the land degradation neutrality targets, there are these bridges. The challenge is now, and that's another thing, we have to break the silos at the ministry level. If you talk about food system, it's mostly in the Ministry for Agriculture. And then if you talk about climate, it's in the Ministry for Environment, and sometimes it's in the Ministry for Food Security or Health. So also what we need at the other end is also maybe an institutional refresher also at national level, which is not easy. I'm living in Germany and looking at how siloed our German ministries are working. I think it's not different in other parts of the world. And finally, and that also picks out one of the asks what Rebecca has presented, it's the whole financial support. We really have also a silo, and correct me if I'm wrong. So for example, what we need is really a better alignment of the Global Environment Facility money with the Green Climate Fund and all the other funding lines. So this is also, sometimes this money is only dedicated to biodiversity, only dedicated to climate. And we really have to go on getting a broader landscape approach at the end and to implement this funding at a landscape with smallholder farmers, with people who are living on the ground. And in this context, I think the calls we have, the call to action is more important than ever. And it's a responsibility of all of us, wherever we have influence and whatever we can do, really to bring together, to use this momentum of alignment. And I think through these 3 COPs having in 3 months, keeping us super busy, it's a huge opportunity. And it would be great to say something really great at the end of this year, maybe at the UNCCD conference of the Rio Trio presidency, with a really implemented, focused, finance-focused statement agreement, and also to integrate this in the non-state actor program. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Martina. I think it's a great way to segue to Diane. So receiving that compelling messages, how you see business can help to drive food system transformation, and how are you supporting not only big businesses, but also supporting frontline food system actors to deliver this goal? Diane,
thank you so much, Gonzalo. Absolutely. Business has a huge role to play in making sure that we actually do shift and transform these food systems and agricultural systems, keeping people very much at the center of it. Without business on that journey and really helping to drive that, then we're going to continue to have significant challenges, many of which we're all very familiar with. You know, all of the leading businesses that we work with were huge endorsers behind the food systems call to action, for example, that the now 160 heads of state have signed on to. And the desire from business to see policy leadership coming out of governments to drive the integration, to drive the opportunities, to implement NDCs and NBSAPs in a way that really truly brings food and agricultural systems into that is something also unprecedented. And yet there's huge, not just readiness, but demand for that from the business. Martina, so much of what you said is true very much from the business sectors as well. Gonzalo, like you said, I mean, WBCSD does represent a lot of the large leading global ag and food businesses as our members who are very active in this agenda with us and with many of the people here as partners. But all of that happens through partnerships with their supply chains. And that goes all the way back down to the farms and the communities that are at the source of the supply that is what we all depend on. You know, with the lens, the breakthrough lens that the COP28 team was able to bring to this, we brought together with you, Gonzalo, and others, this partnership around how do we now frame this action at a landscape level in a way that drives real consistency around regenerative outcomes and alignment on what that means with really keeping the farmer at the center, understanding that there's climate and nature and equity benefits that sit at the heart of that work when done consistently and credibly. We brought forward the action agenda on regenerative landscapes, launched in COP28, but intended to bring delivery with multi-stakeholders in some really groundbreaking ways into COP30. So through this COP trio that we have this year into COP30 next year. And, you know, that was a big contributor to the engagement that you shared in your first slides. We've got now more than 3.5 million farmers as part of that work, transitioning over 160 million hectares across 115 countries. and across more than 40 commodities. And we know that at the farm, it's not just a single commodity. Those are often, farmers are using multiple crops, and that is reflected then with this landscape approach. But what I think is really powerful with that is that there's over 2.2 billion in transition funding already committed. And that's the piece that we're really trying to unlock further with that work. We want to accelerate that as we continue the build since Dubai into Belém next year. And we want that to be in very specific landscapes with clearly defined initiatives. And we see that really developing. And that consistency that we need to therefore align business behind for their work in partnership with farmer organizations and policy leaders and educators and other groups on the ground needs to be aligned behind 5 key impact areas: soil health, which is of course what brings us really into the heart of the CCD conversations, but also biodiversity, water, greenhouse gas emissions, and essentially farmer livelihoods. And so part of what this work is also doing is driving much greater coherence and alignment on how companies are defining their work in regenerative agriculture, which started off kind of all over the map. And through very concerted effort, we're getting to a much more aligned, clear, outcome-driven result of what that work really means. So we're going to continue to drive the multi-stakeholder advocacy. We're going to continue to support the implementation of the food system call to action, for example. And we're going to be looking, as we head into Cali, so many of us next week, how we really leverage the aspects of the global biodiversity framework. Martina, you touched on a few of those, but Target 18 is going to be really key from a business perspective, how subsidies are repurposed so that we're supporting the right kinds of outcomes through the massive amount of money that moves through agricultural subsidies as well. Business has a big role to play in supporting how those are repurposed in a way that supports farmers and helps drive some of these supply chain transitions that we know are needed as well. So we'll do this in partnership, as we've done with the farm organizations, with the suppliers. We're bringing the traders into these conversations very clearly, and really use this as a compelling case for what business working in partnership can accomplish and why we need this real robust integrated policy to drive the outcomes that the system absolutely has to have. So with that, Gonzalo, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Diane. Super clear. I would like now to listen from Luca. As we all know, the big question is, where do we get the money from, right? Diane just mentioned the wrong incentives that sometimes we have when it comes to subsidies, but we all know the importance of money flowing in order to, for example, finance the transition and help us deliver the good thing. Could you tell us how financial institutions can help to drive this and some of the work that you're doing at GAWA Capital? You're mute, Luca. You have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much, Gonzalo, and thanks for the invitation to participate to this very fascinating conversation. So I would like to start with a number to answer your question. Which is $150 trillion. And that's the estimated amount of total worldwide assets under management. So all the money that we have. And if we compare it to climate finance, which is estimated to be around 2 trillion and had to go up to, there are different estimates out there, maybe 10 trillion a year. That is a fraction of the 150 trillions available. So the money is there. The questions, for me, there are 2 questions. One is, how do we mobilize it? So how do we convince capital owners to deploy the capital into climate? Which kind of incentive we build? Which kind of regulation we put in place? This is the first kind of, the first quite important question. And the second one, which is equally important and very interlinked to the first one, is that once we have unlocked it, how can we allocate it and distributing it to projects and people that need the most and then can produce the best climate results. So GAWA Capital, we have been working over the past 15 years to address these 2 separate but yet very interlinked issue, how to unlock it and then how to actually invest in it and having it trickling down. We're an asset manager. We have invested more than 250 million euros over the past 10 years. And primarily, we've been investing in financial institutions so that they can provide loans, saving, and insurance products to vulnerable communities in emerging markets. And we have, over the years, mobilized more than 200 million euros capital from large institutional investors. So what is our role? Our role is to design investment strategies that, on the one side, are able to unlock large amount of private capital, but at the same time, they also need to provide a measurable positive impact on the life of vulnerable farmers and small businesses. Let me give you an example to make it even more clear. In 2019, we launched a 120 million euro fund, which aims at support small farmers by ensuring they get access to quality financial services to purchase inputs and mitigate risks. The theory of change behind the fund is basically that if farmers had access to quality financial services, they can buy better inputs, they can become more productive, they can make more money, and potentially can get out of poverty. So the fund has been basically investing in financial institutions, primarily microfinance institutions, transforming them and making them more agricultural ready. Traditional financial systems, unfortunately, does not understand agricultural risk very well, and so they're quite unprepared to provide good services to farmers. Now, in order to unlock capital, we use blended finance. So we've been mixing investors with different risk, return, and impact profile. For example, the European Commission invested 10 million euros of first loss tranche, so they took more risk for the same potential return, and that unlocked 90 million euros of private capital, including, for example, 20 million euros from Allianz, a large institution, large insurance firm. So that's part of the 150 trillion I mentioned at the beginning. And then to ensure that the capital flows to farmers, as I mentioned earlier, now we use microfinance institutions as intermediaries. So we invest debt and equity in microfinance institutions, and we help them transform and become more agricultural ready. So this is basically what we do. This project has been very successful. We built a very good portfolio, global portfolio, and we're tracking on a quarterly basis the progress that these institutions, our microfinance institutions, are doing in better serving farmers. And we're also monitoring, with the help of third parties, outcomes and real impact that is generated at the community level. Now, there are two lessons that we have learned from in this process. The first one is that blended finance, a multi-stakeholder approach, where you bring around, the same table, parties with different perspectives, but aligned interest, can be very powerful. So if we want to tap into the 150 trillion, I think blended finance must be there. I'm not saying that that's like only that, but it can really be extremely helpful. So multi-stakeholders activity initiatives, such as the food system call to action, or the co-ops, are very helpful in creating this critical dialogue that is needed to bring us around the same table, European Commission and Allianz, for example, and then it creates very interesting dialogues, in fact. So this is the first, I think, the first lesson. And the second lesson is that financial institutions, you were hinting at it in your questions, really play a critical role between, linking the financial markets with the real economy. So they're absolutely essential to ensure that the money trickles down. And Diane was kind of mentioning that as well. Example, microfinance institutions have a very special relationship with farmers. So we should use that relationship and ensure that microfinance institution will start positively influence the decision of a farmer to adopt climate solutions, for example. Banks play a major role in financing large infrastructure projects or whatever projects or assets that can either protect or negatively impact biodiversity or nature.
So Luca, please wrap up so we can move into the Q&A, please.
Sounds good. Financial institutions, basically, what I want to say is that financial institutions, have been stuck more on the risk side of things and should really move more into financing opportunities. I'm done.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
So that's basically it. I think that my key message is really we need to restart trying to pushing financial institutions in becoming more climate ready.
Brilliant.
Sorry, it took maybe too long. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Thank you, Luca. And as you all know, like for the call to action, it's really important to have the connection of a multi-stakeholder collaboration and dialogue between civil society, farmers, businesses, financial institutions. As we could not listen directly from Betty, I will say from my perspective as a farmer, the importance of what you have said, Luca, to have the right type of incentives and the finance mechanisms for farmers to flow rapidly into providing the right type of solutions for climate, for nature, and for people. I don't know any farmer in the world that wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to destroy the planet. Quite the opposite. And they have one of the most important capacities on restoring nature, providing the well-being for people, providing solutions for nature, but also for the soil. And I am sure that if we develop a mechanism that will provide the money, so some farmer will say it's about what comes to my pocket, right? I will do what allows me to fulfill that need and be happy to be providing food with all of this extra value. And that means connecting very properly to those farmer communities all around the world. So I'm sure that Betty would explain much more about how much farmers around the world are capable, if not already delivering in many places, the food system transformation. So with that, I will hand over to Rebecca to moderate the Q&A. So Rebecca, you take it from here. Brilliant.
Well, thank you so much for your for our panelists' insights and perspectives. And yeah, a real shame that Betty isn't able to join us. We'd also really just create the space for any farmers, representatives, and frontline food systems actors on this call if they would like to share their perspectives. Really keen to create space for that in the Q&A. So now we've got about 15 minutes or so. We'd love to hear from you any questions or comments to our panelists and anything that you've heard on this webinar to start the discussion. So I'll open the floor and either raise your hand and come in or post Q&A in the chat. Oliver, please. Oh, and if you could maybe introduce yourself as well when you come in, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks very much, Rebecca, and thanks to all the panelists as well. Oliver Kemp from the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. I work on environment and food systems policy and advocacy. And I'm also very pleased to be on the advisory council for the food systems call to action. And we have to thank so much the climate champions for preparing the messaging ahead of the 3 COPs, which is super helpful. My question is really, I suppose, probably for Luca and Diane. And it's about the business case and by extension, the investment case for the type of financial flows that we need to see. I mean, we have to imagine that businesses will continue to need to balance economic outcomes, commercial outcomes with environmental and health outcomes. And likewise, investors will need to do the same. So how can we make sure that they can do that and that the business case and that the investment case really works out? Given the constraints and the competing pressures on those businesses and investors. Thanks, over.
Thanks, Oliver.
Thanks,
Diane,
Oliver.
And then Luca? Yeah.
Sure, Rebecca, thanks. Oliver, quickly, the business case is pretty clear. Ag and food companies are at the forefront of risk when it comes to the impacts of climate change, and they see the result of the daily challenges that farmers are grappling with when it comes to yields and storms and health of crops. That affects prices in their supply chains, not all of which they can pass on. And when they do try to pass those costs on, often it has very challenging implications. So they are facing a business model challenge that requires them to also be working on these issues for the resilience of their own business models, that then carries down through the supply chains that they're part of and up to investors when it comes to showing resilience and risk management at an enterprise risk management level. So the investment strategy of what they're doing through procurement and supply chains, all the way through actually to how they're positioning their portfolios with consumers, is a key part of what's driving the changes. We're bringing into that coherence, credibility, and driving the ambition and giving focus to the types of investment that are needed so that we can get better, faster action in a sector-wide or region-specific landscape way.
And the perspective of financial institutions is extremely similar. A more resilient, so if I'm a financial institution and I finance, for example, an irrigation system for a farmer, that farmer will be more resilient. And as a result, my credit costs as a financial institution will be reduced. And in case of droughts, that client will still keep on paying. So I think that's the kind of mindset shift that I was mentioning that needs to happen. At the moment, financial institutions are more focused on risks, right? So internal risk. How I don't give money, I don't lend money to this farmer because I might default because he's in a very risky regions. It should be the mindset shift should be, well, it is a good business for me to finance an irrigation system so that the risk of this client will go down.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Diane and Luca. So we have a question in the chat for Martina. So how could we really build on the linkages in the global biodiversity framework with how food shows up both under UNFCCC and UNCCD?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. I think what we have to consider is, at one hand, we have this global framework, but the implementation, it's happening at national level. And therefore, I think as a very important next step is really that at national level, those who are responsible for this implementation mechanism, like the NDC, like the NB-subs, like the land degradation neutrality, comes together at national level and discuss really in detail how this could be implemented. And I think the momentum, what I mentioned at the beginning, is now because the member states have to update their NDCs for COP30 and they have to update their NB-subs for COP16, but it's an ongoing process. And I think the challenge is how to bring in the UNCCD in this context, because Gonzalo's mentioned, it was always a little bit the forgotten Rio Convention, and building the bridge between the two, and then building on what Diane said. What does it mean for a landscape in a country? And how to bring these three requirements together, for example, to manage sustainable soil. How does it look like on the ground, which is target 2 at the end, target 10 in the GPF. It's all over in the adaptation and the mitigation program of climate, and it's a focus of the land degradation neutrality. So this is all steps where we should contribute and we should really work with member states, and we have these entry points. So we have the call to action, we have the UNDE declaration, we have the UNF Food System Summit Convergence Initiative. WWF has doubled and is going to develop also a guidance tool for NB-subs where we try to link up with the NDCs. So I think the instruments are there. FAO is doing a lot, but it's more how to bring this on the ground. And this is a challenge for everybody from us could contribute, and more than even important to bring in those who are tackled of this, like farmers, like people on the ground in this. So yes, it's a good way, but it's a long way still. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Martina. So we've got a few questions coming in on the chat. I just want to see if any of the, whether you'd like to come in, the people who have posted these in the chat. I'm probably going to get your name wrong, but Angshuman, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Angshuman from India. We are implementing the India Cold Chain program. So basically, we are doing cold chains for, mitigating food loss and GHG emissions, and we are seeing a lot of challenges in access to finance. And I just want to know if, risk-sharing facilities for financing cold chain for food loss is a good option. I think I'll direct this question to Luca. I think he is an expert in finance, and he'll be the right person to answer that, because we are looking at blended financing as well from the government, and partnership with a lot of banks here in India. And if any other international organization like IFC, World Bank, there's a lot of interest in bringing easy finance in cold chain. But even after there is a subsidy from the government of 35 to 50%, there is a huge challenge of providing that finance to the beneficiaries who are not the farmers exactly, but the farmer producer organizations in India. So we are working with the subnational governments in Haryana and Bihar. So these are the subnational states. So if there's some thoughts on it, and how do you think the risk sharing facility can be a good solution?
Yeah, thank you, Anshuman.
Sorry.
Sorry,
Luca, if I could just add, we've got a follow-up question tied to that in the chat, which would be great if you could answer as well, given time. And that question is it fair to say that risk-based investment is more likely to provide funding for adaptation than mitigation? Thanks, Luca.
Yes. So what is the second one? Sorry, I missed that. If it is easier to do mitigation than adaptation, is that right?
Yes. Is it fair to say that risk-based investment is more likely to provide funding for adaptation than mitigation? Yeah. So on the first question, so we did look quite closely to cooling systems in India, in fact, and you have some very interesting players there like EcoZen or Inficol that you might be familiar with. I think the issue with the cooling cold chain in India is that to have effective cold chain, you do need the whole chain from the beginning to the end. So sometimes having just parts of financing, just parts of it, might not work. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's probably one of the challenges that you might be facing. And again, I'm not an expert in cold chain, but I think the key there to be successful is really to involve the entire value chain, right? So it's not just about focusing probably on the FPOs, but it's really focusing on the entire ecosystem. Blended finance, I think, can play a very important role, but still, blended finance is there to reduce the perception of risks for investors. Cannot be completely subsidizing a project that doesn't make any sense. So I think the first point is to design a project that really is robust and is integrated within an ecosystem, and then using blended finance potentially to attract the investors that are not sure whether they are coming in, and basically makes the difference. That's my take on that. And on the adaptation, there is this is a very personal perspective I have, and you might not agree with it, but I personally believe that farmers, especially small and vulnerable farmers, should really be focusing on climate adaptation more than climate mitigation. I mean, we all create a little bit this mess, and I think we can ask small farmers, vulnerable farmers, to solve it for us. So I think a lot of the efforts have to go into more efforts have to go into a climate adaptation compared to mitigation, and that can help reducing the risk of a farmer, and so attracting more capital into food systems. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Luca. So we've now got quite a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to group them. And Diane, I think there's a couple around the role of business. So one around the role of business in the transition and the what extent does innovation factor in, and then another around accountability around big agribusinesses. And I know you're doing a lot of work around that, around accountability framework. So over to you, Diane, and then we'll group a few other questions. Conscious of the time, so also grateful if we could keep the insights brief.
I will try. If I miss any of those key points, let me know, Rebecca. The role of business and finance, that was the first one that you summarized, is that right?
And innovation, yeah, exactly.
So innovation is absolutely critical, because a lot of the innovation does come out of the private sector, obviously. But often the challenge is finding the right investment to scale those. And there's been some really interesting initiatives to try to support scaling high opportunity innovations. that need to be supported and continue. Aim for Climate being a great example, but others at national levels and regional levels as well. So we want to be able to help connect the financing opportunities to those innovations that can have some of the greatest pickup for scale and impact. On the question regarding the role of big business and agribusiness and the role of traders, we are working very actively to bring the traders into this in a way that delivers the outcomes due to the position that they have in the supply chain and how they try to send the right messages and incentives, not just with their customers, the buyers, but in how they're incenting and working with the farmers in the catchments from where they are sourcing for their global trading. Shifting those global supply chains that they're part of is a big challenge and requires significant investment. And we need to be really designing for that as part of next steps. Maybe, Rebecca, just one key thing. I was going to put a response in the chat on the question regarding cold chain freight transport in India. A quick note on that, there's quite a large amount of investment going on under an initiative called the Zero Emission Vehicle Emerging Markets Initiative, which is funded by 17 countries and has private sector partnership in it as well. India was the first country to move with a commitment to transform the electrification of road freight transport. EFAST is the partner on the ground in India who's really leading a lot of that work and ensuring that truck refrigeration, freight refrigeration is part of that investment money that's coming in would be a key opportunity space. So it's sometimes looking outside of our normal spaces into where other investments for the needed infrastructure are coming in.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Diane. So I think we're covering quite a few questions. Noting Lana's really important question, which we will come to shortly, would now like to go, I think, probably to Martina around Richard's question around aligning multiple government departments, and then also noting Tony's question, Martina, around how well do we think we understand how to implement landscape-wide solutions across many commodities? What is needed to enhance more investment in key diverse foodscapes around the world? Martina.
Okay, let me start with Tony's question on the landscape. I think what we have, and especially as WWF, we have a lot of experience on this landscape commodity diversification of crop approach. It's more this question, and I don't have the answer to be very open, how to bring in the private sector. So what we really need is, and that's something maybe to Luca also, to get investments, to invest in large restoration projects, which is not only building eucalyptus, but really do restoration in a different way. So, and take the lessons learned from the existing landscape projects. So we have also to state we are not reinventing the wheel. What we really have to frame it in a different way and to scale up the initiatives which are already happening. So that's one answer. And I know we are running out of time. For Richard's question, yes, to bring together the different government departments, it's really working at national level and at regional level. And also with all the initiative and the push we have given these food systems, with all of you in the call and all this huge community which has grown since we had the UN Food System Summit, I think this is also this momentum where everybody could contribute in the places where you live. And as WWF or with the climate champions and the call to action, I think we have something we could go on the ground. Yeah, we have 160 governments committed to, at the end, align biodiversity and climate. And now we could say, hey, you have signed this. What is happening now? And that's where even we as an NGO, we put pressure on this. We want to see what's happening and how to bring this together. And by the way, the whole food loss and waste topic is an important topic, and it offers a lot of opportunities. And one thing which I forgot to mention on the landscape approach, if we talk about landscape commodities, we also have to think about renewable energy, because this all will not happen without renewable energy. And that's something where we often forget in this overall landscape approach and implementation on the ground. And I stop here.
Thank you so much, Martina. So I'm going to ask Gonzalo to cover Charlie's question in his closing remarks. And apologies, we haven't got a chance to go through all of the questions, but fantastic engagement. So just very briefly, Lana, on your question, and happy to follow up offline as well. So this is absolutely the heart of what we've been doing this year. We've been working with partners through the Just Rural Transition around outreach to farmers organizations. We hosted with them 3 dialogues with farmers organizations around the world. As you know, we're engaging with Youngo around youth and through Indigenous peoples networks as well. So we're very keen to centre the asks and needs on frontline food systems actors. I'm going to close us out and hand over to Gonzalo given time, but huge thanks to our panelists and all of the questions and engagement. Over to you, Gonzalo.
Thanks so much, Rebecca and Charles, and thanks also for the question. Indeed, the high-level champions are definitely one of the best structures that can collaborate in the collaboration, but also in the interlink between the 3 Rio Conventions or around the action agendas. When it comes to climate and nature, there is also an initiative that was set by the governments called the Climate Nature Collaboration Platform. We at Ambition Loop are hosting the secretariat, and therefore we're helping to deliver that connection between climate and nature. But then on the other side, we're developing the action agenda for the CCD in a strong collaboration with the high-level champions on climate. So the idea is that we do not duplicate, that everyone working, let's say, in land is the same team that is working in land for climate. Same thing with water, same thing with food, same thing with finance, same thing. So we will not duplicate when it comes to the CCD, but rather complement and strengthen the link between climate and desertification, knowing that when it comes to desertification, as I said initially, it's all about food and agriculture, water, is soil health. So the work is being done and delivering, and very much hosted by the climate champions. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us, and of course to our excellent panelists for their time and the insights of today. We know again that food systems are incredibly complex, and every time that we bring a conversation, that arises immediately, and they're very locally specific and require tailored and locally appropriate solutions. So we must ensure food system transformation is just and inclusive and centers on the needs of frontline food system actors. Thank everyone for all of your capacity on bringing that into the conversation. We need, of course, so many different actors to take action. It's great to always see the multi-stakeholder collaboration arising in all of our dialogues. And definitely we all have a role to play, and if we all take action together, we know that we can go further. And now it's time for us to rally as a community to align around these shared asks and reach out and bring many, many more people and organizations along with us. So I urge you to join the food system call to action, to continue to build momentum on food systems, to really keep on collaborating collaboratively towards the same common goal. We know that together we definitely can make this happen. We can transform food systems to deliver for people, nature, and climate. Thank you very much, and looking forward to see many of you next week in Cali. Bye-bye.